Now we'll start with the, or we'll continue with the development of GIT. So in the previous session, we discussed the basic introduction of the development of GIT. And you know the derivatives of foregut, midgut and hindgut. So in this session, we'll deal with some derivatives of foregut. So first we'll have a look at the development of esophagus. So where does this esophagus develop from? You know, it is actually developing from foregut. So which part of foregut? It is that part of foregut between the pharynx and the stomach. So look at that figure. Here you are seeing the foregut. So it is between the pharynx and the stomach. You know that is the esophagus that is developing. So initially what happens is you find a small bulge there, a small bulge or groove there, and that is what is termed as the laryngotracheal groove. So later what happens is this groove will further bulge so as to form a diverticulum there termed as the respiratory diverticulum. So it is from this respiratory diverticulum you find the whole of the respiratory system, that is the epithelial lining of the respiratory system is developing. Okay. So now what happens? Look at that figure. What you see here is the foregut. This part of the foregut is going to develop as your esophagus, and in the foregut, in the anterior part, first you have got a small groove developing termed as the laryngotracheal groove. Later you find it is bulging so as to form the diverticulum there termed as the respiratory diverticulum, and later you see this respiratory diverticulum will undergo elongates, then further divides into two from the epithelial lining of the larynx, trachea, bronchi, everything is developing from that. So now what happens? So that is the development of esophagus. So read that esophagus is presenting or presents a median, or a foregut presents a median laryngotracheal groove ventrally, and that groove will bulge so as to form the respiratory diverticulum. And it is from the respiratory diverticulum you find the lining of the larynx, trachea, then bronchi, lung system, everything is developing from that respiratory diverticulum. So now what happens is this respiratory system have to get cut from the digestive system. So what happens is you first find a small groove developing there, or a septum. Look at that. This is the area where you find a small septum will develop. That septum will divide this trachea from your esophagus. In front you find trachea, behind you find esophagus. So you call that septum as the tracheoesophageal septum. Fine. So this tracheoesophageal septum will extend anterior or extend upward so as to divide that region into a ventral part termed as the trachea, which forms part of the respiratory system, and a posterior part or dorsal part of esophagus. So this tracheoesophageal septum will divide that area to trachea and esophagus. What happens is you find an incomplete development of septum, of this tracheoesophageal septum, which lead to the clinical condition or applied condition termed as a tracheoesophageal fistula. Why this fistula? You know the different varieties of tracheoesophageal fistula, and what common or what causes is this incomplete or this non-deviation or non-development of the septum. Now read that. Initially you find this esophagus will be very short, but later it elongates, and there are certain factors which helps in the elongation of esophagus. First is of course the development of neck. Then you find the development of diaphragm which pulls, which comes down, plus the development of heart and lungs. So the whole mediastinum, when develops, this initial short esophagus now elongates and becomes large. And initially what happens is you find lumen will be there initially for esophagus. So why? That is because of increased proliferation of endodermal cells there. Large number of endodermal cells will proliferate so as to obliterate the lumen. Later what happens is these cells, these endodermal cells which were obliterating the lumen, now undergoes breakdown so as to form recanalization, and you very well get a lumen. Fine. So what happens is, in this normal process, when you find something abnormal in this recanalization process, that leads to the condition termed as the atresia or stenosis. You must have heard esophageal stenosis, esophageal atresia. All these are caused because of some defect that later or that affects this recanalization process of these endodermal cells. Okay. Okay. So now you know the development of esophagus, and when you think of the development of esophagus, these two things should be there in your mind. What is that? It is only the epithelium that is derived from the endoderm of foregut. The epithelium is derived from the endoderm of foregut, but the surrounding muscles are there. You know the different layers of GIT, you know the different muscles, the musculature, the connective tissue, all these are being derived from splanchno-pleuric mesoderm. So when I am saying it's a derivative of foregut, always think it is the epithelial lining that is the derivative of foregut. The surrounding muscle layer is derived from the splanchno-pleuric mesoderm. When I am saying muscle layer, there is something very specific in the muscle layer of esophagus. What is it? Esophagus upper third will have got striated muscle. Middle third will have got mixed muscle. That is, both mixed means both skeletal muscle plus muscle, and lower third is smooth. So why you get the upper third as striated there is, you get some contribution coming from the pharyngeal arches. Fine. So this much details in the development of esophagus you can remember. So the same figure I have mentioned it again and again. Look at that figure. You find the foregut, a diverticulum developing, respiratory diverticulum. You find a septa. The septa dividing into two parts. You can see the septa is further deepening and separating this whole thing. Look at that, two structures. Behind you find the esophagus, in front trachea. The septum is developing on either side. It's fusing. Look at that, two separate tubes are now developed. Fine. So now the applied aspect. Three things you can remember in case of esophagus. One is esophageal atresia plus esophageal stenosis. The cause I have already mentioned. What is the cause? It is because of a defective or some defect in that recanalization process of the lumen will often lead to atresia and stenosis. And one more thing you should remember of esophageal atresia, and that is you get a patient, a pregnant lady coming to you, the fetus is suspected of having an esophageal atresia. The very common presentation you get in that pregnant lady will be polyhydramnios, increased amniotic fluid in the back. Why this increased amniotic fluid? And that is what is termed as polyhydramnios. Why this increased amniotic fluid or polyhydramnios is often associated with esophageal atresia? That is because the in esophageal atresia, the fetus will not be able to swallow amniotic fluid. That is a normal process. The fetus will swallow this amniotic fluid so as to maintain it as normal. Once this swallowing process is not there, you find polyhydramnios. Not only esophageal atresia, you find it in duodenal atresia. All these things will be associated with hydramnios. And this esophageal atresia will be very commonly associated with tracheoesophageal fistula. Fine. So these two things, one, esophageal atresia, two, esophageal stenosis. Third one is tracheoesophageal fistula. Which one? I have already mentioned, because of that non-formation of the tracheoesophageal septum, that often leads to this fistula formation. You know the four varieties that is often described for the fistula. So with that, we finished the development of stomach, and now we finished the development of esophagus, and now we are proceeding on towards the development of stomach. So stomach, of course, is a derivative of foregut. So actually you find a fusiform dilatation in the foregut. To be more precise, it is in the 4th week of your intrauterine life. So in the 4th week of the intrauterine life, you find a fusiform dilatation in the foregut. And in the initial presentation, in that fusiform dilatation, you find it will have a ventral border. Behind you find a dorsal border. If there is a ventral border and dorsal border, you should have a right surface and a left surface. Plus you find dorsal mesogastrium and ventral mesogastrium. What are all these things? Once you see the figure, it will be clear to you. So look at that. This is the initial fusiform dilatation you see here. Look at that. A fusiform dilatation in the foregut after the esophagus. So first of all you find this border, that border which faces in front, that is the ventral border. The border which lies behind, that is the dorsal border. So this surface will be the right surface. Here you find the left surface, and connecting the two borders, that is the ventral border and the dorsal border to the anterior and posterior abdominal wall, you find the ventral and the dorsal mesogastrium. Now what happens is, there is differential growth or apparent differential growth in the two borders, and what happens is the dorsal border behind will have more of growth when compared with the ventral border. That should be in your mind. The dorsal border will overgrow when you compare it with the ventral border. Fine. Now what happens is, this stomach will attain the final position because of certain rotations of the stomach. In relation to stomach, two rotations you have to remember. One rotation occurs in a longitudinal axis. Look at that longitudinal axis, and that is a 90-degree clockwise rotation. So that is the first rotation you should remember. A 90-degree clockwise rotation. So what happens? When there is a 90-degree clockwise rotation, you find the initial ventral border will now rotate and reach the right side. Look at that, that will reach the right side. And what happens to that dorsal border? That will rotate and reach the left side. So this border, ventral border in front, now moves towards the right side and becomes the lesser curvature of the stomach here. The dorsal border will move here, and that becomes the greater curvature. Now what happens is, this initial surface, the initial surface, look at that, that initial surface, the left surface, before rotation, the left surface will undergo rotation because of this 90-degree, becomes the anterior surface. I think you got it. The left surface will rotate 90 degrees, so it will become the anterior surface, and that is the reason why you find the left vagus is supplying the anterior surface. Fine. So that is the first rotation that you should remember. So what is that first rotation? Rotation in the longitudinal axis, 90-degree clockwise rotation. As a result of it, the dorsal border becomes the greater curvature. Then you find the ventral border becomes the lesser curvature, and then what you find is that left surface now comes and becomes the anterior surface, thus making the left vagus supplying the anterior surface. So that is the first rotation in the longitudinal axis. Now what happens is the second rotation. The second rotation of the stomach occurs at an anteroposterior axis. So look at that. When the rotation occurs in the anteroposterior axis, initially both the cardiac orifice as well as the pyloric orifice were in the center or in the midline. As a result of this anteroposterior axis rotation, what happens is, this cardiac end will be slightly moving towards the left side, and the pyloric end moves towards the right and slightly upwards. And that is how you get the final position or the final position of the stomach. So read that. First rotation 90 degrees. As a result of it, left surface becomes the anterior. The left vagus will supply the anterior surface. Second rotation is the rotation in the anteroposterior axis. As a result of which, cardiac end, which was initially in the midline, moves towards the left and downwards. Pyloric end, initially in the midline, moves towards the right and slightly upwards. So that is how when you think of the development of stomach, always think of these two rotation. First rotation, the longitudinal axis, that is the 90-degree clockwise rotation. Second rotation, the anteroposterior axis. Hope that is clear to you. Okay. Now what happens? I have already mentioned to you that you have got two mesogastrium. Mesogastrium means connecting the ventral border and the dorsal border. Of course, changes occur when there is rotation. To the anterior and posterior abdominal wall, you find the ventral mesogastrium and the dorsal mesogastrium developing. So look at that. This is the region of lesser curvature. This is the region of greater curvature. So connecting the lesser curvature towards the anterior abdominal wall, you have got the ventral mesogastrium. The other part you get the dorsal mesogastrium. Now what happens is, it is in the ventral mesogastrium you find the liver is developing. Fine. So with the development of liver, this ventral mesogastrium is now split into two. Look at that. With the development of the liver, this ventral mesogastrium is now split into two. That is, one part which extends from the lesser curvature of the stomach to the liver. That is what is termed as lesser omentum. Fine. And the next part from the liver to the anterior abdominal wall. And that part is going to develop as your falciform ligament, your coronal ligaments, like that. So in short, the development of liver in the ventral mesogastrium will split the ventral mesogastrium into lesser omentum here, and this part becomes the falciform ligament and coronary ligament. Fine. So now what happens to your dorsal mesogastrium? In the dorsal mesogastrium, you have got the spleen developing. So spleen is actually a mesodermal derivative in the dorsal mesogastrium. So what happens with the developing spleen? This dorsal mesogastrium is now split into this part. What do you call that part? That part from the stomach to spleen. What do you call that ligament? That is the gastrosplenic ligament. And from the spleen towards the posterior abdominal wall, to be more precise, it is running in front of the kidney. So what do you call it? It is lienorenal ligament. So this dorsal mesogastrium is being divided by the developing spleen into gastrosplenic ligament and lienorenal ligament. Fine. And that part which extends below this dorsal mesogastrium here, that forms the greater omentum. So now I think you understood what are the changes which occurs to the mesentery. Fine. So now last, the applied aspect of stomach. So one thing you have to remember is the congenital hypertrophic pyloric stenosis. Most commonly, one of the very common condition you say in male babies. And the newborn will be typically presenting with projectile vomiting. The vomiting will be very typically projectile vomiting, and it will be non-bilious. Why? It is because of the obstruction or some defect in the circular muscles, that thereby producing a stenotic effect in the pyloric region. Fine. So the vomiting will be non-bilious, it will be projectile, and on clinical examination of the baby, you can feel a palpable mass in the right hypochondrium epigastric region with a visible peristalsis. And it is one of the conditions that require a surgical correction. So I think with that we finish the development of stomach. So you know, in relation to the stomach, what are the things you should remember? 1, a fusiform swelling in the foregut. 2, rotations. 1, rotation the longitudinal axis. 2nd, rotation the anteroposterior axis, thereby developing or thereby causing the stomach to attain its normal position. Plus, what are the changes which occurs to the mesogastrium, that is in the dorsal and the ventral aspect, plus 1 clinical aspect, congenital hypertrophic pyloric stenosis. So I think we'll proceed on towards the next derivative, that is the development of duodenum. When you think of the development of the duodenum, some more things you should remember. Whenever you are thinking of duodenum, duodenum is one structure that is derived both from foregut and midgut. So this much part of the duodenum is derived from the foregut. Which part? till the opening of common bile duct. Common bile duct is opening into the second part of the duodenum. This is the second part of the duodenum, and you find the common bile duct is opening there till the opening of the common bile duct. So first part of the duodenum and certain part of the second part of the duodenum is derived from foregut. The rest other region, the rest of the parts of the second part, third part and fourth part, these regions are derived from the midgut. So since duodenum is derived both from foregut as well as the midgut, you find arteries of foregut as well as the arteries of midgut supplying it. That is a peculiarity of duodenum. Now what happens? So I already mentioned duodenum is developing as a derivative both from foregut as well as midgut. Now what happens is you find this is the duodenum. The duodenum will be suspended to the posterior abdominal wall by the mesoduodenum. Now what happens is when the stomach is rotating, the duodenum also undergoes rotation, and so what happens, this loop is now moving towards the right side along with the rotation of stomach. Now what happens, you can see this loop have now reached the right side, and this mesoduodenum now gets absorbed as a result of zygosis. Now what happens? Now you find the peritoneum is covering only the anterior surface. Why? Because this mesoduodenum gets absorbed by zygosis, and that makes duodenum retroperitoneal. What do you mean by the term retroperitoneum? It means you find the peritoneum is getting covered only on this anterior surface. Why? That is because of this absorption or zygotic action on this mesoduodenum. Fine. So I am using the term retroperitoneal. Don't think the whole of your duodenum is retroperitoneal. No. This initial 1 to 2 centimeters of duodenum in the first part still will have some amount of remnants of mesoduodenum attached to it, which makes it non-peritoneal. Rest all of the parts of the duodenum except that initial 1 to 2 centimeters, all other regions will be retroperitoneal. So read that. You find the duodenum is derived both from foregut and midgut. Initially you have got the mesoduodenum developing, then you find a clockwise rotation of the gut along with the rotation of stomach, and what happens is initially that loop was projecting ventrally. Now that loop gets rotated towards the right, and then what happens, the mesoduodenum gets absorbed and becomes retroperitoneal except the first 1 to 2 centimeter of first part, and that is the reason why you often visualize that region as the duodenal cap in a radiograph. Fine. And later what happens, initially you find the obliteration or endodermal cells proliferating. Later you find the recanalization of the lumen so as to form a very well formed lumen. So anywhere in this recanalization process something affects what happens, that often leads to duodenal atresia, duodenal stenosis, like that. Okay, so they are all duodenal stenosis. These are the two applied aspects that you should remember. Duodenal stenosis and duodenal atresia often result because of some defect in this recanalization process. And one typical symptom or one typical characteristic feature that you should remember in the case of duodenal atresia, the patient will present, or the newborn baby will have bilious vomiting. And on radiograph you get a typical double bubble sign. That's very typical double bubble sign in the case of duodenal atresia. Okay. So I think with that we'll stop the development of foregut derivatives, and in the next session we'll deal with the other derivatives of foregut. Okay. So thank you.